It was a crisp winter evening in Manhattan, the city alive with twinkling lights and bustling crowds. Barron Trump, now a young adult and taller than nearly everyone in the crowd, was on his way back from a business meeting. Wrapped in a designer coat and scarf, he blended into the upper echelon of New York society. But as he walked past a busy corner near Central Park, something caught his eye. A figure huddled in the shadow of a building, a cardboard sign trembling in the icy wind. The sign read, "Former teacher in need, anything helps." Barron paused, his breath visible in the cold air. He took a step closer, drawn by a strange familiarity. The person sitting on the sidewalk was gaunt, with weathered hands gripping a paper cup, but there was no mistaking the eyes. They belonged to Mr. Caldwell, his middle school history teacher, a man who had once commanded classrooms with wit and wisdom, bringing lessons to life in a way no textbook ever could. Barron's heart sank. He remembered Mr. Caldwell vividly, the man who had sparked his love for politics and history, who had once encouraged him to think critically about the world. To see him like this, broken and alone, was jarring. Without hesitation, Barron knelt down, ignoring the curious glances of passers-by. "Mr. Caldwell?" he asked softly, his voice tinged with disbelief. The man looked up, his tired eyes squinting against the streetlights. For a moment there was no recognition, but then his expression shifted, and his lips parted in astonishment. "Barron? Is that you?" "It's me," Barron said, his tone steady but gentle. What happened?" Mr. Caldwell hesitated, clearly embarrassed. "Life happened," he murmured. "Lost my job during the pandemic. Couldn't keep up with the rent. Things spiraled from there. I didn't think anyone would recognize me." Barron sat back on his heels, his mind racing. How could someone who had given so much, shaping young minds, inspiring countless students, end up like this? The thought was unbearable. He reached into his pocket and handed Mr. Caldwell a crisp $100 bill, but the gesture felt hollow. This wasn't enough. This man deserved more than a Band-Aid. He needed a second chance. "Stay right here," Barron said firmly, standing up. "I'll be back." Mr. Caldwell nodded weakly, too stunned to protest. Barron walked briskly to his waiting car and gave his driver quick instructions. Within minutes, he returned with bags of warm food, a thick wool coat, gloves, and a hat. But even as he handed them over, he knew it wasn't enough. "You don't belong out here," Barron said, his voice filled with determination. "You're coming with me." Mr. Caldwell hesitated, pride flickering through his weary gaze. I don't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden," Barron insisted. "You're the reason I started believing I could make a difference in the world. Let me help." Reluctantly, Mr. Caldwell agreed. Barron helped him into the car and took him to a nearby hotel, where he booked a suite and arranged for a hot shower and a change of clothes. That night he stayed up researching shelters, job programs, and resources for the homeless. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized he wanted to do something bigger. Over the next few days, Barron worked tirelessly to help Mr. Caldwell get back on his feet. He connected him with a job placement agency and used his own connections to secure an interview at a private school. He even covered the costs of temporary housing and bought him a phone to stay in touch. But Barron didn't stop there. Inspired by Mr. Caldwell's situation, he decided to launch a new initiative, a foundation aimed at helping teachers who had fallen on hard times. The project quickly gained traction, with donors and organizations rallying behind the cause. Barron used his platform to shed light on the struggles many educators faced, advocating for better pay, resources, and support systems. Months later, Mr. Caldwell was back in a classroom, doing what he loved most: teaching. He stood taller, healthier, and more confident, a man reborn. And though he often told people about the student who had saved him, Barron never sought recognition for his actions. To him, it wasn't about the headlines or the praise. It was about honoring someone who had once believed in him. As for the foundation, it became a powerful force for change, helping hundreds of teachers rebuild their lives. and every time Barron visited one of the schools it supported, he couldn't help but think of Mr. Caldwell and the lesson he had taught him. All those years ago, one person with enough determination could make a difference. Years later, the foundation Barron had started became a beacon of hope not just for struggling teachers but for educators worldwide. Stories poured in from those who had been given second chances. Teachers who once felt abandoned by the system were now thriving, re-entering classrooms with renewed purpose. The foundation grew beyond Barron's initial vision, funding mental health resources, retirement support, and even scholarships for aspiring educators. Mr. Caldwell remained one of its most compelling success stories. He flourished in his new role at the private school, where he became a beloved mentor, often inspiring students with his own tale of perseverance. He spoke about resilience and how even in the darkest times, the smallest act of kindness could change everything. His story resonated deeply, not just with students but also with fellow teachers, many of whom quietly sought him out for advice or a listening ear. Barron, now a confident and influential figure, kept close ties with Mr. Caldwell. They often met for lunch or coffee, catching up like old friends. But there was always a quiet, mutual respect between them, a bond formed not just out of gratitude but out of shared understanding. The power of giving back. One evening, Barron invited Mr. Caldwell to the annual gala for the foundation, held in a grand hall adorned with chandeliers and filled with educators, philanthropists, and public figures. It was an event dedicated to celebrating the unsung heroes of the classroom. As Barron stood at the podium to deliver his speech, he paused and gestured toward Mr. Caldwell, seated in the audience. "There's someone here tonight who reminded me what it means to make a difference," Barron began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Mr. Caldwell, you believed in me when I was just a kid in your classroom. You taught me that history isn't just about the past. It's about the choices we make today to shape the future. When I saw you that day on the street, I knew I had to repay the lesson you gave me, that everyone deserves a chance to rewrite their story." The crowd erupted into applause as Mr. Caldwell stood, visibly moved. Barron continued, "This foundation exists because of teachers like you, people who give their all, often without thanks, to prepare the next generation for the world ahead. Tonight, we honor you and every teacher who has faced challenges yet continues to inspire." That night, Mr. Caldwell was presented with a Lifetime Achievement Award, a recognition not just for his resilience but for his years of dedication to education. The honor humbled him, but he made sure to shift the spotlight back to Barron and the foundation. "You never gave up on me," Mr. Caldwell said during his acceptance speech. "And now, because of you, thousands of teachers won't have to face what I did. You've given us hope, and for that I'll always be grateful." As the gala ended, Barron and Mr. Caldwell stood together, watching as guests mingled and celebrated. "You've built something incredible here," Mr. Caldwell said, placing a hand on Barron's shoulder. "So have you," Barron replied. "This is as much yours as it is mine." Over time, their story became a powerful example of the ripple effect of kindness. Barron's foundation continued to grow, influencing policies and inspiring other initiatives to support educators worldwide. And Mr. Caldwell became a symbol of resilience, often traveling to speak about his experiences and the importance of supporting teachers. For Barron, it wasn't just about the foundation or its accolades. It was about living out the lesson he had learned from Mr. Caldwell years ago. One act of compassion can transform a life. And for Mr. Caldwell, it was a reminder that no matter how far you fall, there is always a way back, with the right support and someone who believes in you. Together, their journey proved that with kindness, persistence, and faith in others, extraordinary things can happen. Years passed, and the foundation's reach expanded internationally. What began as a modest effort to help struggling teachers in the U.S. grew into a global movement, supporting educators from underprivileged communities in every corner of the world. Schools were built in rural areas, teacher training programs were funded, and countless lives were transformed, all because of one encounter on a cold New York evening. Barron, now a seasoned philanthropist and advocate, often reflected, on the moment that had set everything into motion. Whenever he spoke at events or interviews, he would recount the story of Mr. Caldwell, not as a tale of charity, but as a testament to the power of empathy and action. He made it clear that anyone, regardless of their status or resources, had the ability to make a difference in someone's life. Mr. Caldwell, meanwhile, became a revered figure in the education community. Though he continued teaching, his role evolved into that of a mentor and advisor for young educators. His workshops and lectures drew crowds eager to hear his insights, and he used every opportunity to remind people of the importance of lifting others up. "No one gets anywhere alone," he often said. "We're all interconnected. When one person believes in you, it can change everything." One particularly memorable moment came when Barron and Mr. Caldwell were invited to speak at an international education summit in Geneva. Standing on stage together, they shared their story with a room full of policymakers, educators, and activists. The audience hung on their every word, visibly moved by the humility and authenticity of their journey. By the end of their talk, the room erupted in a standing ovation, cementing their partnership as an enduring symbol of hope and transformation. The Foundation's 10th anniversary was marked by the opening of the Caldwell Center for Teacher Excellence, a state-of-the-art facility dedicated to providing ongoing training and resources for educators. The center became a hub for innovation in teaching, with programs designed to address the unique challenges faced by teachers around the world. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Mr. Caldwell, now in his twilight years but as sharp as ever, delivered a heartfelt speech. "This center isn't just a building," he said, his voice steady but emotional. "It's a beacon for every teacher who has ever felt undervalued, overwhelmed, or overlooked. It's proof that what we do matters, and that when we invest in our teachers, we invest in the future of humanity. And none of this would have been possible without Barron, someone who not only remembered where he came from, but who also chose to make the world better because of it." The applause that followed was thunderous, and as Mr. Caldwell stepped down from the podium, Barron greeted him with a warm embrace. The moment was a full-circle culmination of their shared journey, a powerful reminder of what could be achieved when compassion and action intersect. In the years that followed, Barron continued to expand the Foundation's initiatives, and Mr. Caldwell remained a guiding presence. Their friendship became a source of inspiration for many, proving that even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple outward to create monumental change. Eventually, when Mr. Caldwell passed away peacefully, in his sleep, his legacy was honored with tributes from educators, students, and leaders worldwide. Barron delivered the eulogy, his voice breaking as he spoke of the man who had forever changed his life. "Mr. Caldwell taught me that history isn't just something we study, it's something we create. His life was a testament to the power of resilience, humility, and the extraordinary things that happen when we refuse to give up on each other." Though Mr. Caldwell was gone, his spirit lived on in the countless lives he had touched. And as Barron continued his work, he carried forward the lessons of his former teacher, ensuring that the world never forgot the profound impact one person could have on another. The story of Barron and Mr. Caldwell became the stuff of legend, a timeless reminder that no matter where life takes you, kindness and gratitude can change the course of history, not just for one person but for generations to come. As time passed, Barron found himself at a crossroads in his own journey. The Foundation had become a global force for good, and its success was evident in the positive changes it had brought to the world. However, with Mr. Caldwell's passing, Barron felt the weight of carrying on the vision they had shared. He often found himself walking through the halls of the Caldwell Center for Teacher Excellence, the walls adorned with portraits of the teachers and students whose lives had been transformed. There, in the quiet moments, he thought back to the early days, when he had been just a young man with the spark of an idea, unsure of how to bring it to life. It was Mr. Caldwell's belief in him that had propelled him forward, and now Barron wondered if he could ever truly fill the shoes of the man who had taught him the power of mentorship, compassion, and change. But one afternoon, as Barron stood at the window of his office overlooking the bustling city, he received an unexpected letter, a handwritten note in familiar, careful handwriting. It was from Mr. Caldwell, dated just a few months before his passing. "Barron," the letter began, "I'm proud of everything you've accomplished, but I want to remind you of something important. This journey is yours now. The work we've done together, the lives we've touched, they are not mine alone. They belong to every teacher, every student, and every person who dares to believe in something greater. Keep your heart open, your vision clear, and never forget the power of one act of kindness. I have no doubt that you will continue to change the world. With all my gratitude and faith, Mr. C." Tears welled up in Barron's eyes as he read the words, the weight of responsibility lifting just a little. Mr. Caldwell's voice echoed in his mind, reminding him that the work wasn't about carrying on his legacy. It was about continuing the work they had started together with the same passion and conviction. The letter sparked a new sense of purpose in Barron. He began to focus more on expanding the foundation's reach to new areas of need, especially in communities where education was not a given, but a luxury. He spearheaded initiatives that provided resources to rural schools in Africa, Asia, and South America, where teachers often had to work with limited supplies and support. With the help of international partners, Barron established scholarship programs that allowed teachers to attend conferences, obtain advanced degrees, and receive the training they so desperately needed. His work took him to remote villages, bustling cities and refugee camps, places where education was seen as a lifeline to a better future. And everywhere he went, Barron would see the faces of the teachers and students who were impacted by the work he and Mr. Caldwell had started. It was a reminder of how far their influence had spread and how much more still needed to be done. The years that followed, Barron took on a more public role in advocating for education reform, using his voice to push for better pay for teachers, smaller classroom sizes, and more equitable opportunities for students across the globe. He was invited to speak at major conferences and meet with world leaders, but he always returned to the heart of the mission, uplifting those who devoted their lives to teaching and empowering the next generation. And as he did, Barron never lost sight of the lessons Mr. Caldwell had instilled in him. He never forgot the humble teacher on the cold streets of New York, the man who had ignited a spark that had grown into a wildfire of change. Every classroom he visited, every teacher he helped, and every student who benefited from the Foundation's work carried the essence of that single moment. Barron eventually stepped down from the day-to-day operations of the Foundation, passing the leadership to a new generation of passionate leaders. But he remained closely involved, traveling the world, meeting the people his work had touched, and continuing to advocate for those who had once been forgotten. On the 20th anniversary of the Foundation, Barron stood before a packed room of supporters, educators, and families at a grand celebration. The evening was filled with stories of triumph, gratitude, and hope, but Barron felt a familiar sense of quiet reflection. He looked out over the crowd, feeling the weight of all they had achieved. And in that moment, he realized that the greatest tribute he could give to Mr. Caldwell was not in a speech or a ceremony, but in the ongoing work of the Foundation, the work that would continue to change lives long after he was gone. Barron's legacy, like Mr. Caldwell's, was no longer just about one person. It was about the ripple effect of compassion, the idea that every action, no matter how small, could lead to monumental change. And as Barron watched the next generation of educators, philanthropists, and students step forward, he knew that the work they had started together would continue to shape. As Barron's journey continued, he often found himself reflecting on the moments that had shaped his path. The encounter with Mr. Caldwell, the Foundation's humble beginnings, and the many challenges they had overcome together. He had always believed in the potential of people to rise above adversity, but now, with the Foundation firmly established and thriving, he saw firsthand how that belief had taken root in the lives of those they had helped. With each new initiative, Barron expanded his understanding of what it truly meant to give back. His vision grew beyond education, recognizing the interconnectedness of various social issues. He began advocating for mental health support for teachers, highlighting the often overlooked strain that the profession placed on mental well-being. Through partnerships with healthcare organizations, Barron helped provide teachers with the resources they needed to cope with stress and burnout, ensuring that they had not only the tools to teach but also the support to care for themselves. Barron also turned his attention to the students, particularly those who faced additional barriers in their education due to economic, racial, or cultural disparities. The foundation launched scholarships for students from underserved communities, giving them the opportunity to attend high-quality schools and pursue higher education. These students, many of whom had once felt invisible, now had a chance to shine, and Barron took great pride in the stories of success that emerged from these efforts. One story in particular stayed with him. A young girl named Maria, who had come from a small village in Central America, had been one of the first recipients of the foundation's scholarships. Her dream of becoming a doctor had seemed impossible, but with the support of the foundation, she attended a prestigious medical school in the United States. A few years later, she returned to her village, not just as a graduate, but as a doctor who would provide health care to those who had long been without it. When Barron met her during a visit to the village, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment. Her success was not just her own. It was a reflection of the work they had all done to uplift those who had been overlooked by society. As Barron grew older, he became more reflective on his legacy. The work he had done, while remarkable, was never a solo effort. It was the work of many, a community of educators, donors, and volunteers who had come together to change the world. And through it all, Barron remained grounded in the values that had always driven him: empathy, resilience, and the belief that everyone deserves a chance. In his later years, Barron began mentoring young philanthropists, teaching them how to make a real impact on the issues that mattered most. He often said, "True philanthropy isn't about giving away money. It's about giving away your heart, your time, and your commitment. It's about making sure that when you leave this world, you've left something behind that will continue to grow long after you're gone." One evening, sitting in the office that had once been filled with the hustle of daily operations, Barron looked out the window and reflected on the incredible journey he had undertaken. The foundation had become a beacon of hope for countless teachers and students around the world. The Caldwell Center for Teacher Excellence was still thriving, and it had grown into a network of global centers, all dedicated to providing education and support to those who needed it most. As the sun set on another busy day, Barron thought about Mr. Caldwell and the impact that one teacher had had on his life. He knew that the legacy they had created together would continue to inspire future generations, long after both of them were gone. And while Barron's name might never be as widely known as those of global leaders or celebrities, he had created something far more enduring: a world in which educators were honored, students were empowered, and kindness was at the heart of everything. With a contented smile, Barron sat back in his chair and closed his eyes for a moment, knowing that his journey had been worth every step. He had learned that the truest measure of a life well lived wasn't in accolades or achievements, but in the lives touched and the ripple effects of the love, care, and change one person could bring to the world. And as he passed on the reins to the next generation of leaders, Barron was confident that the work would continue, fueled by the lessons learned, the stories shared, and the belief that no matter where life took you, you always had the power to make a difference. As Barron transitioned from his day-to-day involvement in the foundation, he began to take on a more reflective role, advising, guiding, and occasionally stepping in to lend his wisdom when needed. He watched with pride as the new generation took charge, carrying the foundation into a future filled with even greater possibilities. He often found himself in conversations with young leaders, reminding them that the work they were doing was never just about numbers or projects. It was about people. One of those young leaders, Maya, had been with the foundation for several years and had worked closely with Barron. She had been instrumental in expanding the foundation's focus to include environmental education and sustainability programs for schools. She often sought Barron's advice, particularly on the balance between idealism and pragmatism in the world of philanthropy. There's a fine line between dreaming big and overextending yourself, Barron told her one evening after a strategy meeting. The key is knowing when to push forward and when to take a step back and reevaluate. It's not just about grand gestures. It's about lasting change. Maya had a deep respect for Barron, not only for his contributions to education, but also for his humility. Despite everything he had achieved, Barron had remained grounded, never losing sight of the core values that had driven him from the beginning. And it was this quality that had drawn so many to the cause, uniting people from all walks of life in a common mission. Under Maya's leadership, the foundation flourished. They partnered with schools to integrate environmental education into curricula, teaching students not only about climate change but about sustainable practices they could implement in their daily lives. As a result, thousands of students in underserved areas began creating small-scale environmental projects in their communities, empowering them to become change agents in their own right. Barron, now a quiet presence in the background, found joy in watching these projects unfold. His role was no longer about overseeing operations, but about nurturing the next generation of changemakers, those who would continue the work he and Mr. Caldwell had started so many years ago. One evening, Barron sat in a small park near the Caldwell Center for Teacher Excellence. He reflected on the long path he had traveled. He was no longer the young man who had started a foundation out of a sense of obligation to a teacher who had once believed in him. He was a mentor, a guide, a witness to the incredible change that could come from a single act of kindness. The sun dipped below the horizon and Barron smiled to himself. He knew the world would continue to face its challenges, but he had faith that there would always be someone, whether it was a teacher, a student, or a philanthropist, who would step up and make a difference. That was the essence of the work, and it was what kept him going. As he walked home that evening, he passed a group of students gathering around a tree, their eyes bright with excitement as they discussed their latest environmental project. Barron paused for a moment, watching them. He didn't need to say anything. Their energy and passion spoke for itself. He knew they would carry the torch forward, just as he and Mr. Caldwell had once done. Barron's work wasn't finished, but he had done his part, and he was at peace, knowing that the legacy of kindness, empathy, and belief in others would continue to shape the world for generations to come. The ripple effect of one small act of compassion had now become a wave of change, sweeping across borders, cultures, and classrooms, forever altering the course of history.